Good morning.
Kids Haven. So tell me who you all are and how long you've been there.
I am Geralyn Fortney, and I am on the board of Kids Haven, and this is my, 7th or 8th year. Yeah, since 2015.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Rachel Flanagan, I'm our program coordinator, and I've been with Kids Haven for a little over a year, but the position that I'm currently in for about 8 months.
That's awesome.
I originally interned with the organization.
So how did this get started? How did Kids Haven get started?
I would love to talk about that.
Please do.
So it's a little personal to me, so I'm a member of the Junior League. I'm a past president. And, but before my time, in 1998, there were a bunch of women, Liz Zellner, Julie Doyle, some fabulous local women. There had been a bunch of deaths in the community. Someone's husband, someone's child, just a bunch of sad things happening. And the Junior League often will kind of start a nonprofit and then kind of give it away, right, to an organization to run it, right, start it and then kind of have it be on its own. And so these fabulous women did a lot of research and a lot of work. Took them a couple of years. And officially in 1998, we became a 501c3. And it's been 25 years this year, blooming.
25 years.
It's our 25th year, yeah. And it's been growing and fabulous ever since. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I love some of the things that I got off of the website. I'm always stalking everybody's website. Grief is a journey, and Kids Haven will consistently work for inclusivity and equity as we care for our community. So Kids Haven is open to everyone. So the whole DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, you all were way ahead of that because that's the rage today. Everybody needs to conform to that and work with that. So you sort of were pace setters with that, which is great. This I love. Within each person is the capacity to heal. Caring and acceptance assists the healing process. Each person grieves in his or her own way in his or her own time, and sharing with others in a safe and supportive environment allows children to learn about grief. And I think everything's about education. So I loved that. Grief is not a disorder. A disease or sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. The price you pay for love, the only cure for grief, is to grieve. So I told you this was like one of my favorites, if not my favorite. And without getting emotional, I will tell you that it is because my father died when I was 4. So when I heard about this, it's so incredible. It's dear to my heart. And I'm sure my mother wished that there hadn't been something like this when my father died, because she had 4 children from 4 to 14 and she was 32 years old. Wow. So, people that are in that position, they need all the help they can get. And I think that the mental assistance, the support, is so much greater than the financial assistance, actually. Because if you cannot function properly, and especially as a mother with 5 children, then the financial capabilities, whether they're there or not, they're not important, because if you can't function, then you can't live. So it doesn't matter how much money you have. So you all have, and let's talk about the different things you do and that you have. So tell us about peer-to-peer support. What does that mean?
Can I take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we have peer-to-peer support groups. So we're not a counseling agency. We don't provide any individual counseling, but we utilize our trained facilitators to facilitate grief support groups and kind of equipping students and children with the skills to learn about their grief, but also to support one another and rely on one another, so that they can go outside of our groups and learn how to discuss their grief, but be with one another. I'm not really explaining this.
Yeah, no, I think you're explaining it perfectly. We have found that so much of the healing comes from the other children or the other adults. We have an adult group as well with our Monday night groups. They're in almost every school in the surrounding areas for groups, and an evening group at St. John's. Just every other Monday. But the true healing comes from seeing other children and knowing that they're not alone in the journeys that they're facing.
Well, I think that's incredible, because I think no matter what happens in a child's life, if they feel that they're like other children, then the growth process is so much faster, but therefore, of course, the grieving process would be faster as well, which is incredible. So you have family group nights, and what's involved with family group nights?
Yeah, so for our family group nights, we have meal providers that are typically community organizations. So they'll come and volunteer to provide the meal. And we have a time for families to come and have a meal free of charge, where they get to sit around tables with other families and children that can relate to them, which is just a really special time, because we have some conversation starters in the middle of the table, and they get to just kind of talk and get to know one another. And then we split into age-appropriate peer-to-peer support groups with our facilitators, and that's where the parents also have a chance to lean on one another and learn how to navigate their children's grief while they're also navigating their own grief. So it's a really special time to just take the weight off of families by, they don't have to cook a meal, and they can come and be with us, and we kind of alleviate some of their stress for a night. And it lasts from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So during those groups, there are also grief-related activities that kids get to participate in. So they get to express their grief through art and discussion. Similarly, the parents sometimes do some of those activities too. And then we come together at the end of the night and we read a poem called We Remember Them, and we circle up and have like a little ceremony with like a candle, and it's very special. It's also really powerful to see how the kids look forward to that, and how the kids come through our door and they're used to a routine that they're in with that program, and so it's just really special.
Well, it's amazing, because then all of a sudden you have people that are part of a couple that are no longer part of a couple. So then they're meeting someone else that's no longer a part of a couple, and I'm sure friendships develop from that. And then some people may not have families locally, so they meet people that can not only help them with their children when they need that, but also they gain trust through this group of those people. So it just branches out, which is pretty amazing, actually. So the Warm Line, tell me about the Warm Line.
Yeah, so our Warm Line, it's a supportive, non-urgent Warm Line where guidance counselors, parents, teachers, really anyone who's seeking resources to help support grieving children can call us. It's really me on the other side of it right now. And we can support people in that way. I'll often have some counselors even that call from, it's a wide range of calls that we get, but I think the most interesting recently was a counselor from like somewhere 2 hours out, and they're like, I have a client that's coming to Lynchburg and I'm trying to find them a resource. So it's not always necessarily things that are related to our programs, but we have a list of resources that Geralyn's put together over the years where we can kind of point people in other directions, or we'll have families that are looking specifically for our programs, and we can provide supportive listening and education to them.
That's the one thing I've found out through these podcasts, that you all help each other. When Joan Phelps was here with United Way, she explained some items and said, we don't do this and we don't do this and we don't do this, but when we get the phone call, we direct them where they need to go. Which I had no idea that there's so many nonprofits, but all of you all actually help one another, which is absolutely amazing.
It is. It's so cool. And Compassionate Friends, I think, is an organization that's local for individuals who have lost, I think, the sibling or parent. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. But I'll have people call in too, and they're just looking for a different support group. Or somebody who's like 21 years old and they're like, I can't be a part of Kids Haven, but do you have anything for me? And I don't think we've ever reached a point where we had to turn somebody away because of the support that we have within the community, just pointing them in another direction.
And I know one of the people that was on one of our podcasts said that all of the nonprofits in the past would get together and share ideas, and that hadn't been done for a while, but that was done a couple of months ago, I think, for the first time in 3 or 4 years
Share Greater Lynchburg.
Is that what it's called? Share Greater
yes.
Lynchburg.
It's Share Greater Lynchburg is a part of the Greater Lynchburg Community Foundation, I believe. Megan Huffman runs it. She's great. She'd be a good podcast. And yeah, it's almost like a nonprofit hub. And she runs all that. Yeah. And they're great.
Yeah, and so it was done at University of Lynchburg, I understand, 2 or 3 months ago or something, which I'm sad I missed that. I need to go to that. Yeah. So, grief support camp. So what happens there?
Yeah. So for our grief support camp, I got to be a part of my first one last year, but this will be is it third that we're coming up on? So that camp is similar to what happens at group nights. It's kind of an extension of that, but we have grief-related activities again and time for kids to come and kind of participate in those. I'm trying to think of kind of the rundown of camp. Camp is one of my favorite things after last year, and now that we're planning it again.
Just a whole lot of fun.
So is it a day camp for a certain number of days?
Typically it is a 3-day camp.
3-day camp.
And it was for just a couple hours last year, but this year we're doing something a little different, so it's going to be an evening camp, similar to our group nights, except it's going to be for a longer amount of time, so like 5 to 8 p.m. We're utilizing Camp Kumbaya, speaking of partnering with other people. So they're allowing us to rent out a facility this summer, so we'll have the athletic field and a fire, and last year, so we do activities that are related to grief, but also just having fun and just allowing kids. I think sometimes people may look at Kids Haven and think all the activities we do, we're just sitting around talking about our grief, but it's really not all about that. It's about also creating a space for kids to express their emotions in healthy ways through other activities. Like we had a drum circle, we had a yoga instructor last year who came, and the kids love that. And some people were like, how are you going to get kids to slow down? And you'd be surprised. Kids would do that kind of thing.
Music.
Yeah, we had a music circle last year, and a girl that came in and allowed kids to create songs. And some kids wanted to present their songs. And so, yeah, it was really special.
So that's Camp Kumbaya on Boonesboro Road?
Yes.
Yeah. I lived in a house that backed up to Camp Kumbaya for quite some time, and it was really interesting to find out all the different groups that would go there and take advantage of that facility, which a facility like that in the middle of the city is pretty astonishing, actually. Yeah. You mentioned school groups, so expand on that. So there's these support groups. Are they in most all of the schools? Is it just city schools? Is it county schools?
Oh, and that's part of her job. So I'll pass that on to you, but they're amazing.
Yeah, they are amazing. So we have several different, I'm trying to think. We're in Amherst County, Lynchburg City Schools, and Appomattox, I believe. Is that correct?
Campbell County.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Campbell County. So for these school groups, I think what's so unique about them is several of the kids that attend these school groups cannot make it out to our group nights for whatever reason. They just don't have, they're not able to do so. And so we have trained facilitators that go into the schools during the school day and are able to run grief support groups within the schools. And so a number of these kids we may never see at group nights, or typically they don't come, and so it's kind of like two separate groups, but there are so many children that attend school groups. So we have school groups in middle schools, elementary schools, and high schools. And recently we just started one for one of the virtual academies for one of the schools. And so that was just, I don't know who came up with the idea of doing school groups, but it's very unique and very needed because of the amount of students that we see in those groups.
Well, I know from the experience of watching my mother, when you are a couple and then all of a sudden you're a single person, and not only is it devastating, but there's so many other life changes, and life becomes such a juggling act.
Yes.
And so you're taking care of these children or this child, and I don't think people, unless they were in you all's position or lived this situation, getting children up and them getting ready and getting them to school, plus of course this person typically, I would imagine, more than 9 times out of 10 has to work. Some work 2 jobs. So getting a child from A to B and taking them across town maybe is just not feasible.
Exactly.
So for them to be able to get this support in a school environment where they already are is just remarkable.
Yes.
And I would imagine that you're sort of packed with children where that's concerned.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's very cool too to utilize guidance counselors who have
Yes.
such incredible workloads. But they'll reach out to us and just say, we have these children, can we start a group? And if we have, that's where we'll go back to our facilitators and say, well, can we get in there? And we have so many dedicated and passionate facilitators that are so willing to try and fit groups in if they can. But that's been a really cool opportunity to be in touch with the guidance counselors and for them to have a resource to use, because it's such a unique process, grief, and being in the school system. They may not always know how to approach a grieving child,
Mm-hmm.
how to deal with that process.
Well, that's another conversation. I mean, because most often it is very, very, very difficult to approach a grieving child. I mean, it's not impossible, but they tend to go into this shell,
Yes.
and unless they want to communicate with you, it's not going to happen. And force is not even an option with the grieving child like that, or all of them that I've seen, because I have been involved in some support groups where not children, but with parents that have lost spouses. So it was more with the spouses instead of the children. But as a result of that, I've seen how difficult it can be, because they just tend to climb up in that shell, and if they are verbal, it's typically because they're acting out, because they don't understand this entire process and why this person's gone, which is sad.
One thing that we talked about recently, we recently had a training for new people who wanted to be facilitators. And in that training conversation, somebody had brought up, well, what do you do when a child comes and they just sit there, right? They don't engage, but they're definitely listening, they're definitely present, but they're not talking or engaging. And as long as they're voluntarily there, they're taking something in.
Yes, they are.
And so that's what we had said, right? If anyone's a facilitator or a school counselor, it's like, just let them sit and let them listen.
Yeah, because a lot of the time they are. I mean, we'll have students that'll sit in on groups and they'll be absorbing so much, and you think they're not listening.
They are.
And then you get a question that sparks their attention, and they just, overflow with a lot of things. They have a lot to say.
I do feel like it has to be a natural, it has to evolve naturally.
Yes.
It's not something, after what they've gone through, you're not going to force them to do something. And you're absolutely right, because in dealing with children in other ways, when I have been in different situations, it's so much easier, quite frankly, to ignore them.
Yeah.
Because when you do, then they come into their own. You cannot push their buttons. That doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So you have a resource library. How does that work? What is?
Yeah, so we have an extensive, comprehensive resource library. We get a lot of our resources from the NACG, so we're members of the National Alliance for Children's Grief, the Dougie Center, What's Your Grief, a lot of different, I'm trying to think of other organizations that we have. But a lot of these resources are specific to children's grief. There's activities for children and caregivers. There's family activity books. We have resources specific to parenting, survival guides for grief, grandparents that are now taking over the parenting role in different toolkits, resources that are specific to suicide loss, the youngest grievers of like toddlers, how do you deal with that, and just plenty different resources that are out there. And so we have a resource library that's available, so if people call and they're not yet ready to come to groups, but they're looking for resources, we can lend them there. We also started, so Kids Haven in the past has done grief support bags, which were left at like funeral homes, and there still are plenty at funeral homes. But we started making grief support packages. So for families, when we get a new inquiry, we'll send one to them if they're interested, and that has plenty of resources similar to those I just mentioned, as well as personalized letter from us, more about our programs. And then we also have things like sensory toys and Play-Doh and stress balls and little sympathy bears. So we use our resources from our library to put together a package and send that out to families. And then in there is a note that says, when you're ready, you can reach out to us, and come in and join our programs.
That's amazing. And you just hit on something that I don't think a lot of people think about. I know 3 different situations. One couple I knew well, 2 I did not know well. But in all 3 of those situations, there were car accidents. And in all 3 of those situations, both parents were killed in the car accidents. But the children were not. So all of a sudden, in one situation, there were 3 boys who, I mean, I cannot imagine the devastation of being in a car, and when everything stops, you're there, your parents have died, and the grandparents take over. So it's not just one spouse dying, sometimes it's 2. Sometimes it's 2 and a child. And the trauma and the devastation of that, I cannot even imagine. I just can't imagine. And somebody has to immediately just step in. And you mentioned caregivers. I took care of my mother for 12 years. In the last 6 years, she was basically a vegetable. I hate to use that term, but she was totally bedridden and she was spoon-fed. And so that was something that I never took the time to slow down. Because you have to, it's sort of, you're like a robot. I mean, you get up every day and you go through what you have to go through and you just do what you have to do. And then all of a sudden, people started saying, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And so when you have maybe a couple and one person dies and they just start rolling with it and they don't realize they're not taking care of themselves. So from a support standpoint, I think your organization, that's incredible as well, because, if somebody comes in and they look pretty ragged, somebody needs to tell them. Normally that would be me, but no filter, as we talked about earlier. So the stats say that 4.8 million children will experience the loss of a parent by the age of 18. Is that in a year? I guess that's in a year in the United States.
I think so.
That was my understanding, and the reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking 4.8 million children in a year losing a parent. That's catastrophic. So your group and then hundreds of other groups are picking up the slack with 4.8 million people in the United States. So how many either children or parents, how many do you think are involved in your program? And is it hundreds or is it 500 or is it 50?
Hundreds, but maybe tomorrow. I don't know. What do you
I
think
would
would be
say, counting the children who are served in schools and those in group night, I would say in the 60s. Maybe higher if we count the parents. Currently.
We could count parents.
Over, since 1998, probably 1,000. Probably.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Much more than you would think, though. I've had several people ask, is there really that many people in the community? Do you guys get a lot of people? And I'm like, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
That every school group would have a full table, or
Full table.
group nights, we'd have several families.
COVID definitely added recently. Yeah, a lot of people.
I was talking to one of my agents yesterday, and he's 42 or 44, and I think they just had their 7th child. And I said to him, do you realize how old you'll be when that child is 18? He's like, oh, yeah. He said, do you realize how old I'll be when I'm trying to put that last child through college? I mean, can you imagine? But, genetically speaking, you may think through genetics that you're going to live to be a certain age, but you don't. I have a lot of friends that passed when they were in their early 40s, one when she was in her mid-20s. They all had cancer. One was an agent of mine out of this office, and she left behind a 4 and a 6-year-old, and she had breast cancer. So I look at her husband and what he had to do in picking up the ball, and those children now they're out of college, they have jobs, they're married. we just sold one of them a house, as a matter of
Mhm.
fact. And to see, and I remember she said to me when we were talking about looking for a house, and she said, I remember coming to the office all the time, and I had a dog that I always brought to the office, and she said, I always looked forward to playing with the dog. And the funny thing is after her mother passed, her dad would still like bring her by so she could see the dog. And they're great therapy too. They're my therapy. So there's just so much to do. And here's the big question, because this is the meat of this. Where do you get all of your funding? Grants.
And really amazing people in our community. We are so lucky that Kids Haven has impacted so many people over the past 25 years. And we have a biannual letter where we have either a board member, one of our current board members, Drew White, who's a local nurse practitioner, was one of our first ever children in 1998 who was involved as a grieving child through our organization. So he wrote a fabulous letter and touched at the heartstrings, and Kit Nichols, one of our former board members, was a participant as an adult when her husband passed away. So we're lucky that the community supports us so much, I would say, in giving. But also amazing grants from the Schul Foundation, the Greater Lynchburg Community Foundation, the Gwatney Family Trust, local, just a lot of local support. We're really, really lucky.
That's amazing.
Really lucky. Mm-hmm.
So I hate to ask you this, but I ask people that we're talking to or with on these podcasts, what is the saddest thing you've seen? What really has just, I mean, is it a child that you've watched that just could not at all deal with the situation, or what's the saddest thing, or maybe the most rewarding as the result of the saddest thing?
What do you think?
Yeah, I could take a job and maybe over the years you think of something too. I would say maybe something that's the saddest I've seen turned into something that was like, it's so beautiful. It's like, I think seeing people intentionally just process their grief, but a lot of it is around the table with children, when they'll share experiences, or they'll say something they have no idea what it means, or they'll share an emotion that they're feeling and they don't know how to put words to it, but seeing them grapple with those feelings and then come to a place of understanding is just so beautiful. So I think equally, sometimes it's hard, the work we do, and it is sad to just hear about their experiences, but it becomes rewarding when we see them working through things and healing actively. Even more so when we see peers jump in, like a kid will say something they're feeling, and a kid will jump in and support them before the facilitator even has the chance to. And that's peer-to-peer support. Like, that's what we're all about, and I think that's really special whenever we see kids using each other and supporting one another. And just knowing that we're planting seeds, things, just investing in these children's lives in ways that'll go so beyond these groups. Results that we'll never see, but I think it's just so worth it.
It is, because it stays with them forever.
Right.
Absolutely forever.
The friendships they make, and then you hear about parents that had play dates with these kids, they set up play dates for their kids, so that's really, really sweet, yeah.
I've seen many children over the years who were that shell that you talked about, who come in, who are forlorn or sitting and don't speak, and eventually the shell goes away. Over time. And at first, it was sad for me. It was sad for me to see that. But I've never, I do a lot of the Monday night groups. I used to a lot. So I've always seen the shell go away. Over time.
Yes, over time. Awesome. Yeah. Well, time flies. We are out of time, but I want to thank you all so much, and I want to thank you for everything you do. It's amazing.